Hi there. This video tutorial is for the pincushion basket. We've got a nice little fabric basket here with a built-in pincushion. You've got a couple simple handles here so that you can move it around. I like to use it to put my clips in there, but you could use it for other things. So let me give you the supply list and then we'll start working on it. First, you're going to take your inside fabric and place it on your batting so that all the raw edges line up with each other. Then take some pins. I really encourage you to pin this so that these layers stay lined up together. And you're going to pin all the edges. And then you're going to sew with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance all the way around to hold the layers together. Now that you've got those two sewn together, you're going to take your square and you're going to fold it in half like this, so it looks like a half square triangle. You're going to take your ruler and you're going to measure 2 1/4 inches from this point. So when you fold this, make sure it's nice and square. And I'm going to line this up so that the 2 1/4 is right at the tip of that rectangle. The edge of the ruler lines up with the straight edge, not with the diagonal. Don't line it up with the diagonal, line it up with the straight edge. And you're going to draw a line along the edge of this ruler. And if you notice when I'm doing this, I've got this at an angle like this. If you do it like this, it's going to be out from the ruler a little bit. So I like to do it like this to get it right in there by the ruler. So this is my sewing line. So I'm going to put a pin on either side of it to hold these layers in place. So now I'm going to take this to machine and sew. Okay, I'm going to stitch right on the line. You're going to stitch right on this line and you're going to back stitch. Back stitch again. And take it out of the machine. We're going to cut the threads. And now I want you to cut this so that you have a very generous seam allowance, like almost a 1/2 inch. You're going to cut that off, and you can throw this away or save it for something else. So you're going to take your scissors, and you're going to go right in there between the fabric, and you're going to snip up to the stitching. And that way, you can press this open. So now you're going to go to the next corner and do the same thing. So again, we're going to cut a generous seam allowance here. Then we're going to turn this around, get our scissors right in there, and snip up to the stitching, or close to the stitching. Again, so we can press that seam allowance open. So we've got 2 corners done. Go ahead and rotate to the next 2 corners, and Then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now that you've done all 4 corners, this is what it should look like. This is the inside of the basket. And you've got these wide seam allowances pressed flat. So now we're going to set that aside and take our outside fabric. And you're going to do the exact same process on the corners of this fabric. You're going to fold this right sides together. And you're going to take your ruler, and it's still 2 1/4 inches. And you're going to, line up the ruler with the raw edges and then mark your line. So we're doing the exact same process. So I've got my line. I'm going to pin the layers to hold them together. And then I'm going to stitch and do that for all the corners on this square. Okay, so now that we've done all 4 corners on the outside fabric, it looks like this. So what we're going to do is flip it right side out. Notice that I did the same thing on the seams. They're wide seam, and then finger clip that diagonal, that fold, and then press it open. So we're going to finger press these all open. And then we're going to nest the inside part into the outside part. And when you nest them, you want to make sure that both seams are open and that they fit against each other like that. That's very important for this to not get too bulky, for the seam to not get too bulky. And I'm going to go ahead and pin this in place. And you're going to go around and do this with each corner of the basket. Make sure the seams are lined up nicely. And then once these are all lined up, we're going to sew the top edge to secure them together. Now, I will tell you this. If your seam allowances are a little off and the outside fabric ends up being too loose, you will need to put some kind of pleat in there to gather up the extra. I made the outside fabric a 1/4 inch bigger so that it would fit nicely. See, mine fits nicely like that, and any extra you can ease in a little bit. But if your seam allowances are a little off, you might end up with more than that. So I'll show you in a second what you can do with that. And you just manipulate this. You want the edges at the top to line up with each other. Okay, so now that that's done, I would go back and pin. Now you can see on this side there's a little bit extra. Now I'm just going to ease that in myself, but if you don't feel comfortable doing that, and to ease in, I would hold it like that and pin it so that this extra is spread out through the whole area, and then once you sew it, it's not even noticeable. But let's say that you're having trouble with that, and you can take it like this, and you can actually fold it over and make a little pleat. If you've got too much excess in there, you can just fold it over like that and make a little pleat, and that will take care of that. Okay, so I'm going to just keep pinning, ease in that little extra. Okay, so now I've got this all pinned, ready to sew, and I'm going to sew it like this. This helps with the easing in part. Whatever you're sewing on top can give just a little bit, and whatever underneath is going to stay put. And so sewing it this way will help ease it in. And I'm going to do like a scant 1/4 inch. I'm going to do a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And then I'll sew all the way around. Now you can backstitch at the beginning and end, or you can just overlap your stitching. And that's what I'm going to do. When I get to the end, I'm going to overlap the beginning because this is going to get covered up. Now we're going to add the handles. So get your ribbon. What you need to do is you need to measure right from this seam line right here. You're going to measure from here over 1 inch. So there's my inch right there, and I made a mark right next to the raw edge. So I'm going to take my ribbon and line it up with that mark. And if you notice, the ribbon has a natural curl to it. I'm going to have that curl go around the outside of the basket. So I'm going to line this up, and I'm going to pin it in place, just like that. Then I'm going to wrap this around, go to the other side, measure my 1 inch, and I'm going to lay that right next to that mark and pin that in place, just like that. Okay, so you've got this wrapped around the bottom. Make sure it's not twisted. And now we're going to do the same thing with the other ribbon. So let's measure 1 inch. This on the same side that we pinned the other one. Going to measure our 1 inch. Make a mark. Line that up. Pin it in place. Go around the outside of the basket and do the same thing over here. 1 inch from that seam. Put the ribbon next to the mark. Pin it in place. So now it looks like this. So now you take this to the machine and you're going to stitch just over the ends of that ribbon, right about the same scant 1/4 inch, just to hold them in place. Okay, so I'm going to sew over the ends of the ribbon. Now you can see I kind of had to turn this thing inside out so it would lay down under the foot. I'm going to use the same scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to go slow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get my needle into the ribbon, oops, and then take the pin out, and then finish sewing the end of that ribbon. And I'm just going to go down to the next one and do the same thing. That scant 1/4 inch. Get the needle in the ribbon, take out the pin, and then finish sewing over the ribbon. And do that on the other ends as well. Okay, so I've got the ends of the handles sewn on there. Make sure when you do this that they are curved around like that, that they're not twisted, that they're laying nice and flat against the basket. Okay, now let's do the pincushion. Take your pincushion fabric and fold it in half like this and match up the raw edges on both ends here. Then we're going to mark the corners. We want it 3/4 inch this way. We want 1 1/4 inch this way. So I'm going to mark that with my pen. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to round this corner, so I'm going to take a spool of thread and I'm going to line this up on either side. I want this to kind of touch this line and this line, and then I'm going to actually draw around that curve so that I've got a curved line to follow. So now what I want you to do is just put an X right there, because you're not going to sew that. You're going to sew here and follow that curve, but you don't want to sew on that corner. So now we're going to do it on the other side as well. I'll turn this around here. Go ahead and mark that. Take that spool of thread and put it so it touches, or just touches, both lines, and then add that curve. And then we'll just put an X on there so we know not to sew on there. So now we're going to pin this. You're going to need to backstitch at both ends of the line. Just sew this curved line right now. Do that on both corners. Okay, so now that I've got this sewn, I'm going to trim off the excess here, and you want to leave like a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, or a generous 1/8 inch. Either way, it doesn't have to be a big seam allowance. And I'm going to go ahead and snip 3 snips right here at the curve to help it open up a little bit. Okay, you don't have to do that, but it'll turn out right side out easier. And so I'll just go ahead and do this on the next one. And if you're going to snip, make sure you get close to the stitching, but you don't go into the stitching. You really don't want to do that. Now I want you, we've got this laying like this. You want to finger press this fold, the fold here, and then right here. So finger press that. Then you're going to open it up and bring that crease right up to your seam line on the other side. Okay? And then the folds that this makes, you're going to finger press this as well. So now it looks like a box. Okay? Let's do that on the other end. So again, you're going to take that crease and bring it right up to that seam line. And hold that, and then finger press these corners here, these folds here. So again, it looks like a box now. So now you're going to take one of these creases closest to the seam. So here's the seam. Grab one of these two, and you're going to bring that crease right up to the seam, just like that. You want it right up to that seam line. And then I'm going to put a pin there to hold that. So now these other two creases, you got one here and one here, you're going to actually bring those together. You're going to tuck what's between them inside. Bring these two creases together, just like that, and pin that as well. So now let's do that on the other end. You're going to take this crease and bring it up to the seam line. Now I should say, when you start this, it doesn't matter which side crease that you use, but once you do it on one side, you have to do the same thing on the other side. Otherwise, it's going to end up twisted. So I'll show you. If I were to take this and bring it to the other side, now it's twisted. We don't want that. Okay? So when you start, it doesn't matter what first crease, whichever one's closest to the seam, you use that one. But whatever you do on the one side, you have to do on the other side. So I've got that together. Go ahead and pin that. So now these two creases that are left, there's one there, there's one there. I'm going to tuck that fabric in between them and bring those two creases together. Just like that. And you can see the raw edges line up across there. So now I'm going to pin that in place. So now we're going to sew down the sides of this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance to close up those ends. I'm going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to back stitch at the beginning and end of my stitching. And then you do that on the other end as well. I have both ends sewn now. So now it's time to turn this right side out. This opening is going to allow us to stuff, this is the pincushion, so it's going to allow us to put stuffing in there. So now you're going to with your fingers, manipulate this a little bit so that you get a boxed end. You do that on both ends. And when you stuff this, it will help with that as well. It will help push that out as well. Okay. So now we've got a tube with an opening on the side, and this is where we will put in the fiberfill. So that will be the next step. So I've got my fiberfill here, and what I like to do is I like to pull it apart in small pieces. I feel that that helps me get it tucked in there in the corners a lot better than if I didn't do that. And then I'm going to just keep doing this until I've got this full. So what you want to do is you want to fill this. You want this part to stay flat. So you're going to fill up this part, and then we're going to stitch across there to seal it shut. So go ahead and fill your pincushion. I have my pincushion nice and stuffed here. And now we're going to pin this closed. So you want to keep these two top raw edges together, and then you want to push that fiberfill back and pin below where that curve is, because you need room to get your presser foot in there. And as you're pinning, it's going to take a little manipulation because of the fiberfill, but just keep shoving that back. Get those pins down there so you got some space for your presser foot. What we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance across there to close this up. And just adjust it as you need to. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we're going to sew that 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to have to use your left hand to really hold that fiberfill back so that you've got enough room to do what you need to do. So I know on my presser foot, if I have the fabric here and the needles in the center, that's a 1/2 inch. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do 1/2 inch seam allowance. And as you go, you're going to have to keep an eye on these edges and try and keep those together too. So I'm going to back stitch and then go across. Now I'm going to have to pull these pins out as I go because my foot's so wide. And don't be shy about shoving that fiberfill over. You won't hurt anything. It'll bounce right back when you're done. I'm keeping an eye on these pins, make sure I don't sew over them. And then I'm going to back stitch again. Okay, so that's sealed up and ready to add to the basket. Now take your pincushion and you're going to put it on one of the sides that has the handle ends. That's very important because once this is finished, you want the handles to pick up the weight of both ends. And I'm just going to show you this real quick. If you've got, like I had my clips in here, if you don't do it this way, let's say you've got it this way, what's going to happen, those clips are going to weigh your basket down like that, and that's not going to work very well. So you want to put this on one side where the ends of the handles are, so that when you pick it up, you've got support under that weight. So make sure, I just showed you, I just moved the handles and see how that was twisted. You don't want that. You want to make sure they're not twisted. And then you're going to put your pincushion in here on one of those sides, and you're going to center it. You can see these two seams right here. You're going to center this tab thing right in between those two seams. And if you look this way, you can even use where the handles are at to help you center it. So now I'm going to pin this in place. I'm going to line up the raw edges. Make sure it's centered from side to side. So I'm getting ready to sew this. One thing you want to make sure on this part, make sure your straps don't go up there like that and get caught in your stitching. Kind of pull them down like that before you put them under your presser foot. And then I'm going to set it for a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You do not need to back stitch on this part because we're going to go cover this with the bias tape. So I'm just going to secure this in place. And again, you're going to have to shove the fiberfill over a little bit. Okay, that's a little bit skinnier than a 1/4 inch, but it does the job. So as long as on back here nothing got bunched up, we are good. Okay, so now we got our pincushion in there. So now it's on to our last thing to do, and that is the bias tape around the edge. Take your bias tape, and we are going to prepare this by cutting a diagonal. You're going to open it up part way like this, and you're going to cut kind of a 45-degree angle. Doesn't have to be perfect on each end. Now, one thing you want to make sure you do is you want to bring these two ends so they face each other, and you want to cut your diagonal so that they match up with each other. So the diagonal on this goes that way, so on this one it's going to go the same direction. Just like that, so that they could be connected. So then take your glue stick, and what we're going to do to make this easier to work with, we're going to open this up a little bit, and we're going to put some glue stick right on there to hold this closed. This will make it a lot easier for us to have a nice finished edge. And then we're going to close that back up, and give the glue a little bit of time to dry. Do that on both ends. Okay, and give it a minute or two to dry. Now take a look at your bias tape. Usually one side's a tad bit skinnier than the other. What you want to do is you want to put the skinnier side on the inside of the basket. So that way when we stitch, you'll catch the outside. We're going to do this all in one step as far as the sewing goes. So I'm going to find a spot on one of these sides to start my bias tape. And I'm going to again take the glue stick and put some glue stick on the end of this here so that it will stay in place. Make my life a little easier, make your life a little easier. So right about in the middle of one side, wrap that around there. Now you can kind of feel through here from one side to the other the edges of that bias tape. So what you want to do is when you're feeling that, you don't want this edge to feel like it's up higher than this edge. So just feel that as insurance to make sure it's not going to be too high on the back, because then you won't catch it when you stitch. So I'm just going to start pinning this all the way around. And it won't hurt to put lots of pins. It'll keep it from getting away from you while you're stitching. When you go to pin where the pin cushion is, it's going to be a little awkward, but it's not that hard to do. It's just the pins are going to not be able to stand up straight like they are here, which isn't going to hurt anything. You just have to, be aware and pay attention. And when you pin it, just let it come across the top of the pin cushion like that. Okay, so I'm back around to the beginning of the bias tape. And what you're going to need to do, you can see there's some extra here. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut some of this off, but we're going to look at the angle of the beginning and make sure we're going at the same angle. So we'll just leave, I'd say about 1.5 inches and cut that same 45-degree angle. So now that means I need to put some glue stick on here. So now on this piece, you're actually going to fold it over about 1/8 of an inch and finger press. And then what you're going to do is open that finger press and add some more glue to help it hold it in place. Then turn it to the front, and that little tail that's sitting there, you're going to snip that right off. Just like that. Then you're going to overlap this and wrap it around there. And if you need to, just like I have to right now, add some more glue. It would even be helpful to let this dry for a minute to hold its shape in place. I'm taking this pin out because it's in my way, and I'm going to go ahead and, oh, here's another thing you can do to keep that edge down. You can put a clip on there while it's drying, and that'll help you. So I'm going to finish pinning this around here. So when I get to the end here, I want to wrap this around, and I want to pay attention to matching up these edges on both the outside and the inside. So I'm going to take a good look at that, and actually what I'm going to do is put some more glue on there. So that will help it stay in place. So on this side, I'm going to go ahead and match up that edge. You want to make sure this is laying flat enough there, and the one underneath too, and then match up that edge. And then I'm going to go over here and look at this one and bring that one over here so that edge matches as well. And because we've got the glue, that's going to help it stay there. And then I'm going to go ahead and put another pin, and then now we're ready to sew. So I've got this under my presser foot. I'm sewing from the inside of the basket, and I'm going to do about 1/8 of an inch seam allowance here, and that should make it where I'm catching both edges on the outside and the inside quite well. I'm starting at the overlap, and what I'm going to do with this, instead of back stitching, I'm going to overlap my stitching and then trim the thread tails. And this is a good time to take your time and just keep feeling. Use those fingers. You can feel things as you go. Keep an eye on things. And then sew all the way around. So as you get close to the pin cushion, it's going to get a little awkward, but just go ahead and manipulate that pin cushion. Push it down as you need to get around here, and you will be fine. And as you go, you can kind of manipulate the basket towards the front, and that will help things lay flatter in the area where you're going to sew and give you an easier time. I'm coming up here to the beginning of my stitching, and I am just going to sew past that about 1/2 inch. So right over the same stitches. And that's it. So now I'll take that out of there. So I'm going to cut these threads without pulling on them. Since they haven't been backstitched, you need to be a little bit more careful with them. And that is it. Your basket is done. So if you take a look at this, where I joined it, I could have done a little bit better job, but I'm satisfied with it. It's not too noticeable. And then now we've got our handles, got our pincushion, a place to put our clips. There you go. All done. Enjoy.